Number 5. In 1241, the Mongol invasion hit Poland like a natural disaster with an army attached to it. Entire towns were burned to the ground, villages were wiped off the map, and thousands of people were killed or taken captive. The Polish forces suffered a devastating defeat at the Battle of Legnica, where Polish Duke was killed while trying to stop the invasion. Although the Mongols eventually moved on, the damage they left behind was enormous. Large parts of the country were depopulated, trade was disrupted, and the invasion exposed how vulnerable the fragmented Polish duchies were to foreign attack. For many people living at the time, it must have seemed like the end of the world, but Mongol invasion didn't force Poles to fight against themselves, as number 4 on the list. World War I was a disaster long before it became a victory. Because Poland did not exist as an independent country at the time, hundreds of thousands of Poles were forced to serve in the armies of Russia, Germany, and Austria-Hungary. The partition borders cut through Polish families and communities, creating tragic situations where brothers could find themselves fighting on opposite sides of the battlefield, and even fathers and sons could be drafted into rival armies. As the Eastern Front repeatedly swept across Polish lands, towns were destroyed, villages were burned, and farmland was devastated. Millions of civilians were displaced, food shortages became common, and disease spread rapidly. By the end of the war, hundreds of thousands of people from the Polish territories had died, and vast areas of the country lay in ruins. Yet from this suffering emerged one historic outcome. After 123 years of partition, Poland finally regained its independence in 1918. The Great War was bad for Poland, but not as much as number 3 on our list, the Swedish Deluge. It was one of the darkest chapters in Polish history. Beginning in 1655, Swedish armies poured into the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, capturing city after city with shocking speed. What followed was years of destruction, looting, and chaos. Entire towns were burned, villages were emptied, and priceless works of art, books, and treasures were carried away to Sweden. The economy collapsed as farms were destroyed and trade ground to a halt. Combined with other wars raging at the same time, the devastation was so severe that the Commonwealth may have lost as much as a third of its population. Regions that had once been prosperous were left ruined for generations. While Poland eventually survived the invasion, the Deluge marked the beginning of a long period of decline, from which the Commonwealth would never fully recover. But the Deluge was at least a victory on paper. Number 2 on our list wasn't so generous. For more than 2 centuries, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth had been one of the largest states in Europe, but by the late 18th century, its powerful neighbors saw an opportunity. In a series of 3 partitions carried out by Russia, Prussia, and Austria, Poland was gradually carved up until it completely disappeared from the map in 1795. Millions of Poles suddenly found themselves living under foreign rule, often facing restrictions on their language, culture, and political freedoms. Families were divided by new borders, while generations grew up without an independent Polish state to call their own. The Polish people did not accept this fate quietly. Major uprisings, including the November Uprising of 1830 and the January Uprising of 1863, attempted to restore independence, but ended in defeat. Tens of thousands were killed in the fighting, while many more were executed, imprisoned, or deported to Siberia. After each failed rebellion, the occupying powers tightened their grip, suppressing Polish culture and punishing those who resisted. The loss of independence lasted for 123 years, making the partitions one of the longest periods in which a major European nation ceased to exist. For many nations, losing a war is a tragedy. Poland lost its entire country. Losing the entire country seems like the worst thing that could happen, right? But what if we were to combine all of these tragedies into one? World War II was the greatest catastrophe in Polish history. It killed more people than Mongols, destroyed more families than the Great War, and made Poles lose more assets than the Deluge, and installed more brutal regime than the partitions. It began in September 1939, when Nazi Germany invaded from the west and the Soviet Union attacked from the east and divided Poland between the 2 occupiers. What followed was nearly 6 years of terror, mass murder, and destruction. Millions of Polish civilians were killed, including around 5 million Poles murdered in concentration camps. The occupiers systematically targeted Poland's intellectual, political, and military elites in an attempt to destroy the nation's ability to resist. In 1940, thousands of Polish officers and officials were executed by the Soviet secret police in the Katyn massacre. Across the country, entire villages were destroyed, cities were bombed, and countless people were imprisoned, deported, or forced into slave labor. In 1944, the Polish resistance launched the Warsaw Uprising in a desperate attempt to liberate the capital before the arrival of Soviet forces. After 63 days of brutal fighting, the biggest uprising in Earth's history was crushed. Around 150,000 to 200,000 civilians were killed, and much of Warsaw was deliberately destroyed by German forces. By the end of the war, population of Poland has declined by 11 million, the highest percentage-wise suffered by any nation. Yet even victory brought little freedom. Although Nazi Germany was defeated, Poland did not regain full independence. Instead, the country fell under Soviet domination, and a communist government was imposed. Political opponents were arrested, resistance fighters were persecuted, and Poland remained behind the Iron Curtain for more than 4 decades. The war not only cost millions of lives, but also reshaped the country's borders, erased all of its pre-war elite, and left scars that would influence Polish society for generations. So, if you ever feel like you have a bad time, remember, the state of Poland had it worse, and it managed to prevail. Be like Poland.